Doug Benefield began each day by sending a Bible verse to the most important women in his life, his daughter Eva and his young wife Ashley. By the fall of 2020, Doug and Ashley had been married nearly 4 years. Along with their 3-year-old daughter and Ashley's mother Alicia, the couple planned to move from Florida to a town adjacent to Ashley's home state of Maryland. A few days before the scheduled move, the family was having lunch at home. They joked over text messages and packed boxes. Doug ran out for last-minute supplies. He seemed to be enjoying all the chaos and excitement that can come with moving. Ashley and her mother Alicia sorted things around the house, while Doug tidied up his adjacent apartment. A lifelong resident of South Carolina, Doug had rented the second home to be close to his wife and daughter while they lived with her mother. But once they landed in Maryland, they planned to be together. Doug was optimistic, believing this was the fresh start his family needed. On September 27th, with 22 days to go before the scheduled move, Doug sent his last text message. It was addressed to his wife. He was on his way in a rented truck to the house to load Ashley's belongings. Shortly after sending that message, Doug Benefield arrived at the house in Florida in the truck, but he was not going to make it to Maryland. Less than an hour and a half later, a neighbor called 911. Ashley Benefield had run to his door in hysterics, begging for help. She had one of her guns with her. She had just shot her husband, she said. It was self-defense. Ashley's screams could be heard in the background of the emergency call. Officers and medical personnel who arrived at the scene found Doug on the floor in Ashley's bedroom. They tried to save his life but were unsuccessful. Inside the largely empty house, police established that several shots had been fired. They found 1 bullet on the floor and 2 more lodged in the wall. One of those 2 shots hit Doug, while another bullet struck the bathroom door. An initial assessment, later revised, was that Doug Benefield had been shot twice, once in the leg and once in the arm. According to reports, the second shot passed through his arm and pierced his chest. Police quickly found the weapon, a .45 caliber handgun, but 2 other firearms were also discovered in the house. Nearly everything in the house was packed in boxes, but a second pistol lay in a kitchen box in a small container, and a .380 caliber handgun that Ashley Benefield kept in her backpack. Both were loaded. What was notably absent was a second weapon used in the confrontation, potentially wielded by Doug, the alleged attacker. If he had lunged at Ashley as she claimed, there was no sign that he had been armed with a gun, knife, bat, or anything else. At the police station, Ashley was photographed with a scratch on her side. She also had redness and swelling under her left eye. No other scratches or bruises were found on her body. If investigators at this early stage suspected that the self-defense claim was bogus, Ashley Benefield would not provide any clarity. The 28-year-old arrived at the Manatee County Sheriff's Office flanked by her attorney, who had reportedly managed to arrive at the house within minutes of the emergency call. When her lawyer advised her to be quiet, Ashley said nothing more. Back in 2015, Ashley Briers was a valued member of Donald Trump's presidential campaign. She also worked as a swimsuit model, but her true passion was ballet. A young dancer when she lived in Maryland, Ashley dreamed of starting her own company. She envisioned a business that would blend her love of dance with the values of inclusivity. A diverse group of dancers like her brimmed with potential but for superficial reasons were never given a real chance. Ashley's dream troupe would take the ballet world by storm. Those dreams began to materialize when in the summer of 2016 she met a handsome, wealthy widower at a Palm Beach hotel, home to former presidential candidate Ben Carson. Carson had finished his campaign but was still actively engaged with donors. Doug Benefield circulated in those circles. After their first encounter, the 54-year-old Doug was smitten. His cousin described him as blown away by the 24-year-old dancer. They reportedly bonded over their love for God. They couldn't stop talking. It was love at first sight. Their meeting that night sparked a whirlwind romance. Just 13 days later, they were married. Doug Benefield was a military veteran. He served as a pilot in the U.S. Air Force. In 2016, he worked in the defense industry, developing new technologies for a variety of applications. He also found success in his other business ventures, from restaurants to real estate. Doug quickly secured investments for the couple's new ambitious venture Ashley had dreamed about, the American National Ballet Company. Doug was also prepared to spend as much of his own money as needed to ensure the initiative succeeded. Meanwhile, from an 8-bedroom home in South Carolina, Doug moved his new wife in along with his daughter Eva. From that point on, family life was tense. Soon after, a close friend of Eva's moved in, intensifying the strain on the household. Ashley's attempts to befriend the two girls were unsuccessful. Her efforts to bond were overwhelmed by what seemed to be the ballerina's nonstop desire to always be the center of Doug's attention. Her behavior did not sit well with Eva, who was going through a difficult time in her life. Just 9 months earlier, the young girl had come home and found her mother, 56-year-old Ashley Benefield, dead from a heart attack. Renee died from an undiagnosed heart condition. It was a shocking, devastating loss. Less than a year later, Doug and his new wife embarked on their grand plans to develop the American National Ballet. Dancers from around the world secured their U.S. work visas and flew to Charleston, ready to perform. Meanwhile, the two founders of the company were having more and more issues. Apparently, Ashley was getting on her husband's nerves. In the spring of 2017, reading her stepdaughter's diary, Ashley discovered that her efforts to win over the girl had failed miserably. Eva, as she read in the journal, deeply disliked her. This discovery led to a confrontation with Doug. During the ensuing argument, Doug fired a gun into the floor of the family kitchen. He later told his cousin he did it out of desperation when his wife refused to be quiet. Doug also admitted to an incident where he threw a gun towards a wall and punched a hole right through one of them. Despite growing frustrations, at least initially, Doug and Ashley continued to put on a unified, happy front. Just days after Doug discharged the gun, the couple hosted a lavish wedding reception at a downtown hotel. Looking at the smiling couple that evening, no one in attendance suspected the deep-rooted tensions. In August the following year, Doug and Ashley learned they were going to be parents. But that same month, she packed up and left South Carolina. On August 1st, Ashley told Doug she was suffering severe episodes of nausea due to the pregnancy and thought it would be wise to stay with her mother in Florida for a while. However, a few weeks later, Ashley returned to their home in Charleston in secret. She gathered many of her remaining belongings and left her husband a note. She wrote that she feared for her life, she feared for her unborn child, she was leaving him, and she asked him not to contact her. With the founder abandoning the troupe who understood the industry, the American National Ballet essentially collapsed. Doug handed the business to a new management team, which promptly decided to fire half the dancers. From Florida, Ashley wrote that she was devastated but did not return to South Carolina. Instead, she began filing a series of complaints against her husband with Florida law enforcement. During this period, the expectant mother publicly, or at least told others, that Doug was poisoning her and her future baby. The nausea she was experiencing was, in her words, too strong even for pregnancy. Doug must have been putting something in her tea. She went to the Manatee County Sheriff's Office and reported the poisoning. She brought with her the tea set that had been sent to her by her husband as a wedding anniversary gift and demanded it be tested for toxins. Ashley even made the claim that Ashley Benefield didn't actually die of natural causes. She suggested that Doug had poisoned his previous wife as well. Renee's autopsy revealed heart disease and showed that at the time of her death, 75% of her arteries were blocked. There was no sign of poisoning. Then, as the birth approached, she was scheduled for a C-section and secretly delivered a daughter. Doug Benefield was not informed of the child's birth. Ashley did not list his name as the father on the birth certificate. 6 months later, in 2018, the two began a battle over visitation with the daughter. At a hearing in family court, Ashley testified that Doug Benefield was violent, that he was a serial killer who poisoned people. Ashley went on to describe incidents that made her fear her husband, such as the gun confrontation in the kitchen and an episode of erratic driving when he became enraged with her. To these allegations was added the claim that Doug had placed a tracker on her vehicle and been spotted by a neighbor watching them through a window at night. Ashley never accused Doug of using physical force or violence against her, only that he frightened her. For the purpose of the court proceeding, this distinction was substantial. Ashley claimed that the levels of heavy metals found in her body and her daughters were proof that Doug had been poisoning them both. Doug's attorney, Stephen Murphy, cast doubt on the credibility of the toxicology results. The Carlson Company lab found dangerous levels of aluminum, cobalt, zinc, tin, and barium in her system. They unequivocally told the judge at the hearing that the elevated levels of these heavy metals in her body were explained. They asserted that Ashley Benefield was subjected to deliberate, systematic poisoning. Countering this seemingly compelling evidence were medical records made throughout the pregnancy by Ashley's obstetrician-gynecologist and other specialists who concluded that she was in excellent health. In the final decision, issued by family court judge Diana Moreland, Ashley's claims against Doug were criticized. Judge Moreland found absolutely no evidence to support Ashley's allegation that she had been poisoned. She concluded that the Carlson Company testimony was thoroughly discredited by the expert on the other side. By order of the family court, Doug was granted time with his daughter. She was 6 months old when they met for the first time. When it came time to arrange the first visit, Ashley did something no one expected. She happily agreed to the plan. She suggested that maybe the two of them could spend time together as a family. Somehow the couple began a process of reconciliation. But was it genuine? In late 2020, Ashley Benefield was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in the killing of her husband. Florida authorities alleged that Ashley had motive to kill Doug to keep him out of their daughter's life. The real or imagined abuse Ashley claimed to have suffered prompted her to stage a reconciliation with him once in 2018, after the family court ruling, and then again in 2020 before she killed him. Ashley's first line of legal defense was a stand-your-ground hearing. Under Florida law, Ashley could be considered immune from prosecution if she used deadly force in self-defense and it occurred in her home. The hearing took place in September 2023. Ashley had been out on bail, living near her mother and daughter in Florida. The former ballerina never made a formal statement to law enforcement about what allegedly transpired in her bedroom the night Doug died. Fragments of Ashley's version of events began to leak out as evidence was presented to the judge. Her lawyer argued that she tried to kick Doug out of the house, but he refused to leave. When she attempted to walk away, he grabbed her left wrist and blocked the door. After her arrest, word spread widely that Ashley Benefield's self-defense claim fell apart for one major reason: that Doug was shot in the back. It appeared he was retreating, not attacking. However, when medical examiner Dr. Russell Vega took the stand to explain Doug's injuries, that narrative proved to be at least partially inaccurate. For shots were fired. The fatal shot struck Doug in the chest. However, he was also shot in the back of his leg. A third bullet likely grazed his arm. A fourth bullet missed. The order of the shots could not be determined from a medical standpoint. State authorities hypothesized that the location of the fatal shot in Doug's chest could be explained by him turning to flee from the loaded weapon. In this scenario, the shot to the leg was delivered immediately after, as he tried to scramble out of the room. Doug's attorney, Stephen Murphy, had another theory. Doug was known to be a rather athletic man. In his youth, he wrestled and later he took up CrossFit. Doug also studied martial arts, according to Stephen Murphy. The implication was that Doug himself was a weapon. He stood somewhat staggered, ready to deliver some blow. Doug could have then caught the bullet in his leg while executing a strike. Manatee County Detective Daryl Davis, who led the investigation, was questioned about Ashley's possible injuries. In particular, he was asked about the scratch on her side that was photographed the night of the shooting. In the detective's sworn written testimony to the court, he stated that the scratch was at least a day old. Yet Ashley told a witness and former law enforcement official before her arrest that the scratch was the result of Doug's increasingly aggressive behavior towards her. That day, he had intentionally, forcefully pushed a moving box into her body, which she said scratched her side. Forensic scientists tested the shirt Doug was wearing to determine if it bore gunshot residue. Assuming Doug was in close proximity to Ashley, the shirt should have had traces of the powder that explodes out of a gun along with the bullet. But testing revealed nothing. A forensic medical expert testified that based on this, the gun was likely fired from a distance of more than 3 feet. The physical evidence did not present a clear-cut case of self-defense, but the burden of proving that the shooting was more likely a homicide fell to the state. To do this, they explored why Ashley Benefield would have wanted her husband dead. To understand Ashley's motive, it required tracking the latest turns the marriage took after the 2018 hearing in family court. The two had begun spending time together again, going to the beach, playing with their daughter, and dining out. That was until Doug hired a private investigator. He learned that Ashley had moved on to another man and seemed to have no intention of reconciling with him. Doug filed for divorce and the couple officially separated. However, the Benefields' marital roller coaster was not over yet. Ashley filed several complaints of her own with the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, now making very specific allegations about Doug's abusive behavior, but she no longer claimed such behavior was directed at her, but rather at their daughter. Detective Brian Moreland, who is no relation to Judge Moreland from family court, testified about the additional complaints Ashley made on March 21, 2020, and then again on March 23. The case was closed without charges. Yet another allegation was made on April 5, then again later that same month on the 27th. Child Protective Services initiated numerous investigations, and sheriff's deputies also looked into Ashley's claims. Doug's daughter Eva defended him to law enforcement investigators in South Carolina. Each time, they found no evidence to support Ashley's accusations. After multiple agencies came to the same conclusion again and again, the Manatee County Sheriff's Office took the next logical step. They ordered psychological testing. To the consternation of those close to Doug Benefield, by the time of his death in September 2020, he had allegedly reconciled with his wife again, despite all the difficulties. Testimony from Doug's cousin Tommy, to whom he was very close, started to shed light on Doug's perspective. Tommy testified that his cousin routinely found excuses for Ashley's behavior. Doug remained in love with her throughout their separation. Doug was said to be forgiving of her up until the very day he died. Doug's attorney, Stephen Murphy, handling the visitation time with his daughter and upcoming divorce, testified about how their relationship evolved in the days before his death. On the cusp of yet another fresh start, one that involved their move to Maryland, the couple attended mediation to sort through all the unresolved legal issues related to their separation, including Ashley's attempt to get a restraining order. The release of results from the psychological evaluations was key. Doug agreed to all the other terms but refused to stop the divorce until the results of the psych eval were published. There were just 3 days until that hearing when he was killed. Ashley did not want to go before Judge Moreland again. Her previous ruling in 2018 was less than favorable for Ashley, and the judge had essentially determined Ashley was not credible. Ashley also had reason to want to avoid the disclosure of the psychologist's report. Dr. Brad Broder, the clinical psychologist who had been working with Doug and Ashley individually and then as a couple, was the one whose report was set to be presented at the final hearing scheduled to take place 3 days after Doug's death. When prosecutors turned to Dr. Broder, they told the judge he would testify that Ashley Benefield suffered from paranoia, that she frequently exaggerated facts, and that she tested as an extremely manipulative personality. Ashley may not have known the doctor's conclusions, but she would have known what she admitted to him during their sessions, namely, that she had no intention of reconciling with her husband. Ashley's family attorney, Fred Brown, told investigators that before Doug's death, Ashley Benefield had acquired a burner phone, rented a car, found a safe deposit box, and contacted 2 attorneys. On the night of the 27th, she was afraid Doug would figure out her plan to leave him. Her lawyer argued that Doug's behavior justified the fear Ashley felt that night. The state contended that no court in the country would find that blocking a doorway justifies homicide. Manatee County Circuit Court Judge Matt White ruled that Ashley Benefield was not entitled to immunity under the state's Stand Your Ground law. Judge White wrote that the killing was not an act of self-defense, but rather the culmination of Ashley Benefield's prolonged, concerted efforts to exclude Doug from her life and the life of their child. When her attempts to enlist the help of law enforcement, Child Protective Services, and the court system failed, she took matters into her own hands. The court's ruling does not preclude Ashley from claiming self-defense at a jury trial. A trial date was tentatively set for July 22, 2024. The tragic story of Doug Benefield's death is a complex web of marital strife, allegations of abuse, and a custody battle that ended in a fatal shooting. At the heart of the case is the question of whether Ashley Benefield acted in self-defense or carried out a premeditated plan to remove her husband from her life and the life of their daughter permanently. The couple's short marriage was marked by tumultuous events and separations. Ashley's repeated allegations of Doug's abusive behavior, including claims that he was poisoning her and their child, were not substantiated by law enforcement or medical professionals. The family court judge found her allegations not credible. Yet, in the end, it was Ashley who wielded the gun that ended Doug's life. Her claims of self-defense will likely be the central focus of the upcoming trial. The prosecution will aim to prove that Ashley's actions were premeditated and motivated by her desire to exclude Doug from their daughter's life, painting a picture of a woman who made multiple attempts to remove her husband through legal means before resorting to violence. On the other hand, the defense will likely argue that Ashley was a victim of abuse who feared for her life and the life of her child. They will attempt to portray Doug as a violent, controlling individual whose behavior that night justified Ashley's use of deadly force. As the case unfolds in court, more evidence will come to light, including the full results of the psychological evaluations and detailed accounts of what transpired that tragic night. The jury will be tasked with weighing the evidence and deciding whether Ashley Benefield's actions constitute self-defense or murder. Regardless of the trial's outcome, the story of Doug and Ashley Benefield is a heartbreaking one, illustrating the devastating consequences of a marriage unraveled by mistrust, fear, and ultimately, violence. It is a stark reminder of the importance of seeking help and finding peaceful resolutions in the face of domestic strife, and the tragic results when those efforts fail. The Benefield case is a complex and tragic story that raises important questions about the nature of their relationship, the validity of Ashley's abuse allegations, and the events that led to the fatal shooting. As the case moves towards trial, both sides will present their arguments, and the jury will be tasked with determining whether Ashley's actions constitute justifiable self-defense or premeditated murder. The prosecution is likely to focus on Ashley's repeated attempts to remove Doug from her life and the life of their daughter. They will point to the numerous complaints she filed with law enforcement and child protective services, which were investigated and found to be unsubstantiated. They may argue that these actions demonstrate a pattern of behavior aimed at excluding Doug from their child's life, culminating in the ultimate act of violence. Additionally, the prosecution will likely highlight the inconsistencies in Ashley's story and the physical evidence from the crime scene. The location of Doug's wounds, the lack of gunshot residue on his clothing, and the fact that he was shot in the back may be used to cast doubt on Ashley's claim of self-defense. They may also point to Ashley's actions before the shooting, such as acquiring a burner phone and contacting attorneys, as evidence of premeditation. On the other hand, the defense will attempt to paint a picture of Ashley as a victim of abuse who feared for her life and the life of her child. They will likely focus on the incidents Ashley described, such as Doug's erratic behavior, the confrontation in the kitchen, and the alleged poisoning, to demonstrate a pattern of abusive behavior. They may argue that Ashley's repeated attempts to seek help from law enforcement and the courts were the actions of a desperate woman trying to protect herself and her child. The defense may also call into question the thoroughness of the investigations into Ashley's allegations, suggesting that law enforcement and child protective services failed to take her claims seriously. They will likely emphasize the psychological toll of living in fear and the impact it may have had on Ashley's state of mind at the time of the shooting. As the trial unfolds, expert testimony from medical professionals, forensic specialists, and psychological evaluators will play a crucial role in shaping the jury's understanding of the evidence and the dynamics of the Benefields' relationship. The results of the psychological evaluations, which were set to be disclosed just days after Doug's death, may provide critical insight into Ashley's mental state and the validity of her claims. Ultimately, the jury will have to weigh all the evidence and testimony presented to determine whether Ashley Benefield's actions on that fateful night in September 2020 were a justifiable act of self-defense or a premeditated murder. Their decision will have far-reaching consequences not only for Ashley and her family, but also for the broader conversation surrounding domestic violence, self-defense, and the legal system's ability to protect victims of abuse. Regardless of the trial's outcome, The tragic story of Doug and Ashley Benefield serves as a sobering reminder of the complexities of human relationships and the devastating impact of domestic strife. It highlights the importance of taking allegations of abuse seriously, providing support and resources for those in need, and working towards creating a society where such tragedies can be prevented. As the legal proceedings continue, the Benefield case will undoubtedly capture public attention, sparking discussions about the nature of justice, the challenges faced by victims of abuse, and the need for a fair and impartial legal system. While the story's final chapter has yet to be written, its impact will be felt long after the verdict is rendered, serving as a poignant reminder of the fragility of human life and the importance of building a society grounded in compassion, understanding, and the pursuit of truth.